Good afternoon, everyone. I found this week's discussion a little difficult to do, so it took me a little time to get my thoughts together on it, and I'm sorry for being a day late getting this done. But the question said to reflect on the implications of African Americans, both positive and negative, for the end of slavery and the beginning of industrialization. Well, I felt like we really had to start at the beginning when Africans were kidnapped from Africa, and they were treated as commodities, exchanged for food, and then laws were passed to redefine slavery. They actually give it a name. The colonies created slavery so they could continue to cultivate their land and generate profit, status, and success. So it was all about their success on trying to make themselves look better. Africans had no bargaining power, no safe haven. They had no one to turn to when they got here. They could not own any property, sign contracts, bring lawsuits, or even testify. Well, they could testify if it was against another slave. And I wonder, looking back in history, I wonder how many times they were forced in testifying against another slave, even though maybe they didn't want to. They were considered a piece of property. They weren't allowed to marry. They were separated from their families. Through all of this, they were able to retain a sense of self and a firm anchor in their African culture and tradition. The importance of kingship, religion, and culture. And all of this helped them to cope with everyday life and everything going on. They experienced massive cultural assimilation and no choice to adjust. And no choice but to adjust to conditions. Then there was industrialization. Northern states industrialized first, while in the South, plantation systems and agricultural productions continued. In April 1865, the Civil War ended. Slavery was abolished. Black-white relations in the South entered a new era. But I'm sure it didn't enter it easily. This was the South. Right to vote could not be denied to any group because of race, color, or previous servitude. Schools were opened for slaves. African Americans were able to purchase land, homes, and establish businesses. So it was all looking better for them, looking great. Era of freedom was short. Reconstruction followed the Civil War, lasting about 15 years. It was to bring some. Wait a minute. It was too brief. Some legacies of slavery did not change. Centuries of bondage continues in the South, caused black Southerners to be impoverished, largely illiterate and uneducated with very few power sources. It was difficult for them to defend themselves. They confronted greater inequalities and fewer resources were at their disposal. slavery left strong traditions of racism that even today we are still experiencing. After 2 centuries of slavery, prejudice and racism was grained into the Southern culture. And then came segregation. Minority groups is physically out, socially separated, and inferior in virtually every area of social life. Neighborhoods, jobs, stores, restaurants, and parks were segregated. Segregation created a vicious circle or cycle, however you want to look at it. More mainstream, the greater their objective, poverty and powerlessness became. At the beginning of Reconstruction, Southern legislation tried to force African Americans into an involuntary servitude by passing a series of laws known as the Black Code. Government halted the implementation of this legislation. Some African Americans, along with other minorities, became sharecroppers, and once again, they were cheated out of what they were had rights to. They worked for these landowners with the understanding that they were going to share half of the profit made that day. Or, when they took the crops in, half the profit. But what the landowners would do would price gouge, I guess you could say. They would end up claiming they had more debt than they did, or their debt was higher than they thought they was. It just wasn't fair. It's like even after the Civil War, they hit many brick walls because they had so many obstacles working against them. In 1910, more than 1/2 of the employed African Americans were in agriculture, and 1/4 were in domestic occupations. And then there was the Great Migration. Early 20th century, massive population movement out of the South began. Life in the North was better. Freedom to pursue jobs, greater opportunities to educate their children. But once they got there, they found that the North fell short of utopia. Faced massive discrimination in having schools, jobs, and market. In housing, schools, and job market. It's like even the better life wasn't that great. They still met with many obstacles. Booker T. Washington, a prominent African American leader, born into slavery, founder and president of the Tuskegee Institute. His non-confrontational stance left an impact on all. It earned him praise and support from white communities and widespread population in the nation. So I looked up at Google.com to see when Booker T. Washington was born. He was born April 15th, 1956, and he died November 14th, 1915. He was only 59 years old when he died. This is pretty much the end of what I've got according to what was in the book in chapter 4 and 5, but I do have a picture here I want to share. Something I hadn't shared so far is that all my grandchildren are biracial, are multicultural. And here's a picture of my older grandchildren. This picture is about 15 years old, so the 4 oldest ones are grown adults now who have children of their own. And all the things going on right now, I cringe thinking that could be my grandchild just as easily as it is someone else's. And when I watch the videos, especially the Nina Simone's video, I hope I pronounced her last name right, I have to agree with her. That song is very violent and ugly. But at the same time, I cried all through the video. And it was, because of the way people were treated and are still being treated, and to think that my grandchildren could be treated this way also. There's a quote by Booker T that I want to share here at the end. That is, success is to be measured not so much by the position that one has reached in life as by the obstacles which he has overcome. Few things can help an individual more than to place responsibility on him and to let him know that you trust him. If you want to lift yourself up, lift up someone else. Thank you.